I just want, listen, a Christian funeral ought to be full of joy as much as it is sorrow. Got to have that balance in there. So, but I was glad you guys were there. It helped the spirit of the place and the time of celebration for Brother Dennis. So, all right. 1 John chapter 2. We're going to go to Mark, obviously, but I want you to see something here. 1 John chapter 2. I know you're over here. I hope I'm not on a blind spot for you. But up there, I just don't have enough space to fill out the whiteboard, so I'm kind of hindered on how to write and teach up there. So I'm going to try down here and see how it goes. 1 John chapter 2. We're in this thing I call the beginning of sorrows. It's part 3. And I can't go fast through it. We could actually just bang, 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 talk about it and skip a lot of important things that you need to understand when you understand end times. 1 John, I'll show you something here. 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. The Bible says this, little children, and when John writes that, he's talking to Christians. He calls them younger. It's like an older brother or an older dad talking to his children, talking to other believers. And he says, little children, it is the last time. And as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. All right, so let me give you some facts, and I will need somebody. Marcus, next door on the whiteboard there's a black rubber eraser. If you would bring that, it's not in here, so I've got one in the other room. All right, so let's draw a timeline. We'll always use a timeline when you're dealing with the book of Revelation, different things. And let's have John here. And John is writing to the Christians at that time, okay? And John is writing, he writes 5 books in the New Testament. Somebody tell me one of them. The Apostle John writes 5 books. So what is one of the books called? The Gospel of John. Excellent. But you know, he actually wrote 4 more. What are the other ones? Revelation, and then 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. So they all get written around 95 AD. Okay. Now what does he say is still yet to come at 95 AD? What does he say is yet to come? He says, you've heard that so-and-so. Who's the so-and-so? Antichrist. Thank you very much. The Antichrist is yet to come. Now, where we're going with this is there is a couple of theories or approaches, let's use that word, to prophecy. And one of them is prophecy's all done. That all the prophecies came true when Jesus died on the cross. So a guy named R.C. Sproul, other people who are amillennialists, which means they don't believe that Jesus is coming back, he came at the cross, and he came at a time called in 70 A.D. when the temple was destroyed. So let's move that back just a little bit here. Here's 70 A.D., and we have the temple being destroyed here. And when John is writing, he says, who is still yet to come? So he's looking out into the future, and he says there's something called, or someone called the Antichrist. The guy that's against Christ. All right, so with that in mind, he talks about, he calls, it is the last time. So from John's point of view, what was it that he was living in? What is this block of time called? Well, yes, but according to John there, what does he call it? It is the good. So we'll use a more popular, we call it the last days, or sometimes some people call them end times. All right, so that started in 95 AD. Now, the problem is somebody says, well, that sounds very contradictory to say, oh, it's the end of time, and yet here we are 2,000 years later, and it hasn't happened yet. Now, what that ought to tell you is that John is reminding us that to always be ready, that we don't need to know, oh, it's a long time until Jesus comes back. What if he had said that? What if John, the apostle, had said, oh, it'll be a long time before Jesus comes back, so don't be under pressure to be looking for him to come. That's not what any of the Christians said. Paul, John, Peter, all of them said it could be in our lifetime. All right? So that when you get that in your mind, you go, all right. So are we in the last days? Yes. Now, as somebody once said, we're in the last of the last days, okay? We're really up close to the end, I really believe. But I couldn't tell you that if it's going to be 3 years, 30 years, or 3 minutes. Would it be always ready? All right? So, there are probably 500 particular scriptures describing the last days and end times. And what is true about them is they all overlap. So some of them describe things that are going on in the last days that deal just with Israel. Some of them deal just with the Christians. Some of them deal with just the world. And just know this, as far as John was concerned, Antichrist was still coming. You know, he says right over here, he says, I like how he says, even now are there many antichrists. So just because a Hitler rises up doesn't mean that he's the Antichrist. Hitler was a lot like the Antichrist, his hatred of the Jews, his desire for world domination, his control of people using numbers. Every Jew was forced to get a tattoo on their body that was allocated to them by a company called International Business Machines, IBM. They made their money helping Hitler numerically tattoo all of these Jews to keep track of them and stuff. He's a perfect Antichrist, but he's not the Antichrist. You understand? There have always been people who've been like that. All right, so as I've said before, there are at least 6 different views of the second coming of Christ. The tribulation, the rapture, the final judgment. Some people believe that everything that the Bible predicted has already happened. There's no more. All of the prophecies are all done. There are people who believe that. There are people who believe that all of these prophecies are only symbolic and figurative. They're not really, really true. Jesus isn't really coming back. He comes back in our hearts when we fall in love with him and all of these stuff. They play it out very figuratively. There are those that believe that these prophecies that we're reading are literal events that are yet to happen. That's me. I believe that. I believe they're yet to happen. Some people believe they're a mixture of a few literal events and a lot of figurative events. All in all, there's at least 6 views on this thing. Take your pick. But as I said over the last 2 weeks, all prophecies about the future are by nature, are by design. Did you see your paper over there? There was she's looking at me and I'm going, she's not understanding a word I'm saying. All prophecies about the future are by design confusing. And I believe that with all my heart. When you come to prophecy, you're going to get confused because by nature, they're not meant to tell you the precision of the future so that God can delay it. The old word was tarry. How many of you sometimes tarry? Tarry means you kind of slow down and you just don't go right in fast. You come in fashionably late. Well, God does that. You ever wonder why God's not on time? Because he has his own time. He can tarry. He can say 40 days and you're going to be destroyed, Nineveh, and then Nineveh repents and the Lord says, okay, we'll give you some more time. So by nature, when you come, there have been people who have calculated from Daniel chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, and then gone to Matthew 24, and then gone to 1 Peter chapter 3, and have added up numerical numbers and predicted that Jesus would come back in 1836. Somebody else added all of these numbers and said, oh, he's coming back in 1914. Oh, well, he's coming back in 1919. Oh, he's coming back in 1936. And they keep adding up. God did that on purpose to make fools of people who think they can know the day or the hour. So when you come to the Bible and you scratch your head, that's a good sign, okay? That it's designed that way. So let's review. We'll go back to Mark chapter 13. Mark chapter 13. It's Tuesday afternoon. Jesus got basically one more day. And the disciples have no idea what's going to happen the next day. They have no idea that Jesus is on Wednesday going to have the Last Supper and going to be then, as they go out to a prayer meeting. Hey, by the way, What if it was dangerous for us to have a prayer meeting tonight? Would you still come? If there was a mob outside demanding us to leave, would we say, no, we're here for prayer. We're not here by permission. We're here because we're worshiping God. It was like when this mob came up and looking for Jesus, the disciples were stressed out, going, why are you doing this? And they all fled. It was terrifying. So it's still Tuesday, and Jesus and the disciples just come out of the temple. And as you remember in Mark chapter 13, they're looking at all these buildings. Certainly, Jesus, you're talking about Israel being judged, and the nation, and our religion dying, and the old covenant being finished. Certainly, this is going to stay forever. And Jesus says, what? There's not one stone that's going to be left standing on the other. So there in Mark chapter 13, verse 2, let's read that. Jesus answering said to him, seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So he's actually making a prophecy that this temple is going to be destroyed. Which temple? At that point, which temple was he talking about? The physical temple of Jerusalem. There was another time in John chapter 2 where he says, you destroy this temple, and I'll raise it up in 3 days. And they were confused. Everybody thought he was talking about the temple, and he was referring to his body. I wonder why Jesus did that. So that you would learn a great truth about temples, okay? We're going to talk about them in just a moment. So the disciples kind of come alongside and says, what did you mean by that? When are these things going to happen? And we read in verse 6, it says, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. Why did he say that? Can Christians be deceived? That's why he says in verse 5, take heed lest any man deceive you. And there are plenty of them out there. Verse 7, when ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, be not troubled, for such things must needs be, but the end is not yet. Nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be earthquakes in divers places. There shall be famines and troubles. These are the beginning of sorrows. So now let's try and fix our little schedule here, our little timeline. And Jesus says in Mark 13:8, he says, these are the beginning of sorrows. So let's go back here. Instead of just John, let's have it as Jesus. All right? Jesus, he's crucified, we say, 33 A.D. Now, precision-wise, he actually is crucified about 29 A.D. There's a reason for it because they messed up the calendar, but just leave it at 33 A.D. So he's talking just before the cross, and he says, all right, some things are going to happen in the future. What is the one thing that they had asked him about? When is the temple going to be destroyed? So let's list it over here. We know the temple destroyed. That was a big deal because to them, the temple had been rebuilt. Certainly, Israel now is what they call monotheistic, which means we're back just believing in one God instead of paganism and so on and so forth. And to say the temple is destroyed, that's traumatic to them. And he says, not only that, he says things, and he talks about wars and rumors of wars. What else does he list? Famines, earthquakes. Now, sorrow, so on. Sorry, these are all, is this the signs of the end of time? Look at the end of verse 8.
These are the beginning of sorrow.
Thank you. Now, we agree. There is something way out here called, it's like at the end of a cartoon where it says, ba-dee, 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 ba-dee. That's all, folks. Did you ever see Porky Pig do that? It's called the end. All right? So, we know there's something called the end. The question is, when is it? And so we got all these things, and Jesus doesn't say, oh, when you hear wars and rumors of wars and famines and stars falling and all these things, that's the end, is it? Jesus calls it, oh, that's just the beginning. We're just getting started. So now he's built in a bit of time to be able to go before the end time. The only thing that helps us is that word there. Verse 8 says the beginning of sorrows. And when he uses that word is the word for when a woman is travailing to have a child, and she has contractions and she has pain. And what do they talk about those contractions? When a woman has her first contraction, in preparation for the delivery, does she just have one contraction and then the baby comes out? No. You have a contraction and then it may be a Braxton Hicks, or what are they called? What are they? See, the guy doesn't understand any of that, okay? All we know is it time? No, it's not time, okay. So there are contractions, and the thing that we know about this is these sorrows begin, and the only way we actually are getting closer and closer to the end is what's called rapidity, which means there may be an earthquake and a famine, and then a war, and then an earthquake and a famine and a war, and storms and earthquakes and famines and war. And it gets so packed as we get closer and things start happening faster and faster like they are now. That's how we know a baby's coming. Oh, it's been 7 minutes. Now it's 5 minutes. Oh, it's 4 minutes between each. Let's get you to the hospital because the baby's coming, because the contractions are getting closer and closer together. And when this happens, let's say the temple is destroyed at 70 AD. That was the first contraction. And there's a lot more. And so we've seen now 2,000 years of history take place. But it's just like, and Al Gore loves the idea of saying, oh, we've only got 12 years left. We've got 10 years left before the ice caps melt and all that stuff. What is he admitting to? Contractions. Now, I don't believe 1/10 of what he's saying, because I believe in what's called climate change. It changes. Okay? That I believe in. So things go in cycles. But I do believe storms, earthquakes, wars, everything is happening faster and faster and faster. And it may go into a cycle where it goes over a lull for a little bit, but then boom, 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 things will happen again. All I know is we're in this part now. The Jews believe that when the temple was destroyed, it was the end of the world. Was it? Do you know what my grandparents thought? When the Kaiser attacked Prussia, they thought it was the end of the world. They called it World War I. What did they call it? The war to end all wars. It was the most awful war, but it wasn't the end of the world, was it? So just because something seems like it's the end, no, it's still in the contraction stage. Did you have your hand? Yes?
There's one verse that I'm just a bit confused about when it says there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming. So that seemed like as if it was, within their time period.
Right.
What do you say about that?
Okay, what do I say about that is, he says, till you see the kingdom of God coming. All right, and I actually am going to answer that, but I'll be quite honest with you. They saw it 1 week later when Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration, and vroom, he's in his glorified state, and the kingdom of God is right there. But it doesn't actually come yet. He's referring to the new covenant coming, which was at the cross. He says, guys, you get to see the coming of the new kingdom, of the new covenant. Not the second coming. No, it would be, and I'll show you, I'll try to, just for time, I don't want to belabor this too long, but I want to show you some things here. Let's go to Luke chapter 21. You're in Mark, go to Luke chapter 21. And yes, like I say, Bill, what most cults do is they'll grab a verse like that, and they'll grab maybe two more, and they'll build an entire doctrine on those 2-3 scriptures that seem to say it all had to take place in the lifetime of the apostles. Well, what does that leave me? I mean, there's no more prophecy if that's true. I mean, why am I looking for the second coming of Jesus if he's already come? Well, what am I here? And what happens is people then look at all of the Bible as, well, I guess he really didn't mean what he said, because Jesus didn't come back. The kingdom hasn't started. He's not on the throne. David's not alive. The world hasn't returned to peace. So I guess Jesus didn't mean it like I think. And they changed the meaning of the Bible to fit their verses. And that's a cult. All right. So Mark chapter 13 has, he uses these words. He says, troubles. I want you to see Luke chapter 21. As I get there, both Matthew and Mark record about a dozen more disasters that were coming. And let's listen to these troubles. Luke chapter 21, verse 24. Speaking of this future, he says, they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations, talking about the Jews. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, again, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. What's he saying? Jerusalem is going to be taken over by the Gentiles. Question, was Jerusalem a free nation? Was it a free city at that point, at the time of Jesus? Was somebody over in Rome controlling the lives of the Jews already? Okay. So Jesus can't be talking about, this is Rome. No. Verse 25, there shall be signs, we say signals, in the sun and in the moon and in the stars and upon the earth, distress of nations, not of Israel, not just of Israel, but of nations with perplexity. People will not know what to do when you're perplexed. The sea and the waves roaring. Why would a guy farming in central Israel worry about the wind and the waves roaring? Because he's going to have it on TV. He's going to see everything going on all over the world, and hurricanes happening everywhere. Verse 26, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for even the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And I've tried to open your eyes to understand the powers of heaven are the laws of physics are going to be changed so that things won't work right. I believe during the tribulation, you will look at your watch and your watch will keep a different time than it is out there because the earth is going to start spinning faster and you won't be able to know what time it is. Geosynchronous satellites, GPS satellites are not going to work. The powers of heaven, the things that make everything work, are going to change and are going to be rattled, shook. And it goes on, verse 27, and then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, look at that word, begin. Lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. All right, so what is it that Jesus was telling his disciples when they begin to see wars, when they begin to see famines, when they see the temple destroyed, when they see stars falling out of heaven? What should they do? Run for their life, right? No, look up. And all Christians ever since then have been doing that. No matter how long Jesus takes, if we hear of another war, we hear of Christians being persecuted, Christians being hunted down and killed. We hear of laws being made against preaching and against gospel witnessing. Don't freak out. What should we do? Look up, because it may be today. That's the attitude a Christian has. Not that Jesus is only prophesying about his people at that time and it's done. That is not at all in view here. So, these are quite a few storms and things going on. But let's look at Acts chapter 1. Remember, we read that verse, then they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud. Acts chapter 1 and verse 10. Yes, sir. We will. So we look up for our redemption, which means the time when, well, it's actually, redemption has an overlap, okay? So we are saved out of before the tribulation occurs, yes. So some of these things, when Jesus says it, he doesn't explain all the details. He just says, keep looking up, don't get discouraged, don't flee and hide, because it's going according to plan. He's giving a general attitude that we need to have. But the Christian has even a better one, because the Jews do have to endure to the end. We don't. If a Jew gets saved in the tribulation, it's going to be hard. They're going to be the most hunted people on the planet. And what is Jesus saying? Endure. I'm coming back. Endure to the end because you'll see me return. Don't give in. Don't go with the mark. Don't turn yourself in. Stay faithful. So, and according to Revelation, a lot of them do. So, there, like I say, there's overlap and there's gaps that you have to sort of fill in by reading the rest of the Bible and going, well, where does this go? It's like pieces in a puzzle. That fits there and this fits there. Does that make sense? All right. So, Acts chapter 1, verse 10. While they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he, who's he? As he went up, behold, 2 men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven. So did he go up physically? Okay, it wasn't a transporter like Star Trek. He actually took off, went up, and the angel said, he's coming right back down. The same guy, he was physically there. Remember, he said to Thomas, he said, put your hand in my side, put your finger in my hand. Tell me if I'm not real. So as he really went up, he's really coming back. Now what happens is, R.C. Sproul and people who believe that all of the prophecies are done say, well, Jesus didn't promise he was physically coming back. He only appeared to come back in the fire and the smoke of the destruction of the temple. Not true. He has to come back just as he said here. Now, show you something here. Ooh, I don't no time at all. Jeremiah 30. Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 3. Jeremiah 30, verse 3 says this, For the days come, saith the Lord. I like that word days. All right. Now, why doesn't he say centuries? He uses the word days so that they don't get the idea that it could be way out there. I'll give you a little bit of a hint. Jeremiah is writing around 590, 587 BC. Okay? Let me just redraw this whole thing. So he's writing nearly 590 years before the fulfillment of his prophecy. Nearly 600 years. And watch what he says. The days come, saith the Lord, that I will bring again the captivity of my people, Israel and Judah, saith the Lord. And I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. And these are the words that the Lord spake concerning Israel and concerning Judah. For thus saith the Lord, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Wow, I thought by coming back everything would be great. No. What God is doing is bigger than just returning Israel back to her land. There's going to be a sound of somebody trembling and of fear and not of peace. Verse 6. Ask ye now, Jeremiah 30, verse 6. Ask ye now, and see whether a man doth travail with child. What a question. You ever thought about a man having a child? Well, wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness? Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved. Who's Jacob? Somebody tell me who Jacob is. Sorry? Jacob is, sorry? Esau's brother, yes, okay. But it's Israel, okay? So when I think of Jacob, I know that's Israel. It's the nation, it's the people of Israel, literal physical people. And he says it's Jacob's trouble, what we're about to read about. So he goes on, and he says, verse 8, For it shall come to pass, in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck. His being Nebuchadnezzar, because Nebuchadnezzar was surrounding Jerusalem, was about to destroy it. And he said, I will burst thy bonds. I'll break the bonds that he's putting around you, and strangers shall no more serve themselves of him. But they shall serve the Lord their God, and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. Somebody's going to be resurrected named David. Wherefore, hear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord. Oh, sorry, fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord. Neither be dismayed, O Israel, for lo, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity, and Jacob shall return, and shall be in rest, and be quiet, and none shall make him afraid. For I am with thee, saith the Lord, to save thee. Though I make a full end of how many nations? I'm going to get rid of every nation. I read this to you, but we have to review it because there's a lot to it. I will make a full end of all nations, whither I have scattered thee, yet will I not make a full end of thee. So question, before you read any longer, can God get rid of Israel? No. When he uses, you ever heard that phrase, I have loved you with an everlasting love? You ever hear that phrase in Jeremiah? It's in Jeremiah 33. I have loved thee with an everlasting. Who is God talking to? The Christians, right? He's talking to Israel. An everlasting love, that's a love that doesn't stop. So he says, I will not make a full end of thee, but I will correct thee. That's chastening. In measure, I'll only do it so far, and will not leave thee altogether unpunished. So he's going to correct them, okay? So this time of Jacob's trouble, that's the deal. Daniel chapter 12. Daniel. Right after Ezekiel to the right, Daniel chapter 12. Yes, ma'am. Okay. I would. Sure. Her question is, can we know the way in which God corrects Israel? Okay. And you probably have the most number of descriptions of his correction. One of the corrections that God had for Israel was in the wilderness, serpents came along and bit them. That was correction because they wanted to go back to Egypt and they turned their back on God. God had given them manna, God had given them water, and they says, we just don't want to go to the promised land. And so they complained 10 times and God said, here comes some snakes. And that was a correction. When Joshua came into the promised land across the Jordan River, and when they went to Jericho, Joshua marched around Jericho 7 times, remember? And the walls came down and they conquered the city. Woo, great. And after that, he sent a few thousand soldiers to go take a little town called Ai, and they were defeated. And Joshua falls on his face and he says, God, what are you doing? We can't even beat a little bitty hillbilly town, and here we are defeated. What did we do? And God said, there is sin in Israel, and you need to deal with it so that you can get back to being victorious. And it was a correction for Israel. Most of Israel's history is God correcting them constantly. When Nebuchadnezzar surrounded Israel and destroyed Jerusalem and broke down the temple, Solomon's temple, that was God. God said, Nebuchadnezzar is my hand. Nebuchadnezzar is my servant, and he's doing my will by correcting you and bringing you away as captives. And that was God.
So is he referring to the passage before he comes? That punishment is before.
Oh, Israel's constantly being corrected. Even now it's being corrected. You probably throughout history, the most hunted and hated people until Christians have been the Jews. You did not want to be a Jew living in Europe in the Dark Ages. They were chased out of every town. They were always blamed. If somebody died, they blamed a Jew. They called them witches. They said that they were casting spells. And the Jews never were allowed to own land. You ever wonder why Jews always collect wealth? Because they have it for so little time before it's taken from them. And when Hitler gathered up all of the Jews in the ghettos, guess where all of the people's wealth was? On their teeth. They made their teeth coated in gold because they wanted to hold on to their little bit of wealth that they had. And the Germans would just pull their teeth out while they were still alive and take the gold off of them. They have been pretty well chastened for all of history. Sorry. When Jesus comes back, Israel will be saved, forgiven. They will be right with God. Okay? I know I'm taking a long time. Let's just look at Daniel chapter 12. Just 7 verses real here. Verse 1 says this. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of, what's our key word there? Our trouble, a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time, and that time thy people shall be delivered, every one shall be found, that shall be found written in the book. Question, who is speaking? Who is, I don't want to go through all the questions. Who's he speaking to? Who is the thy? When person says thy people, Daniel's people. Thank you. I sometimes don't know how to ask the question. Who's Daniel's people? Are they Christians? Jews. All right. So the Jews shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book when they get saved. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book that he's writing here, this book of Daniel, until when? Seal the book even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, the one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river, two angels. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in white in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and a half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. All right. So, Daniel goes way back. Daniel is written 500, let's say 500 BC. I don't remember exactly when, but we have Daniel here. I can get it right here. Daniel is given a view of the future, and he talks about something. He says a time and a times and a half of a time. What does that look like to you? Like 3.5. And what's unique is Jesus, his whole ministry was for how long? 3.5 years. What if the other 3.5 years was just finished while he was here on earth? You would have had the entire 7 years, but things didn't work out like they should have. I mean, if Israel had accepted the Messiah, we would not have been here. The millennium would have started. Everything would have been fine. But there's still a period of time, 3.5 years long, where Israel is saved. So, out in the future, way out, Israel gets saved. Now, I know there are Jews that get saved all the time right now. People witness to them. They get the gospel. They seek God and they find him in the Old Testament scriptures. But we're talking about the nation of Israel getting saved, and they get saved in the worst time imaginable. It's the 3.5 years that we call the Great Tribulation. Now, how do I know that that has not taken place? Because Israel as a nation has not been saved yet. Israel is one of the most ungodly nations. If you ever go there, they don't have a pride month, they have a pride year. Their nation is filled with homosexuals. It is a filthy, wicked country as far as promotion of the gay lifestyle. Israel needs to get saved. So I know that that hasn't happened yet. Now there are people who say, well, when he says Israel, he means Christians, and that's not true. That is not true at all. Folks, we have been grafted into Israel, but Israel's still here.
Is that the first part or the second part?
Second part. They get saved. Well, actually, they get saved right in the middle of the tribulation, and they have to run for their lives, okay? So I have to stop there.
Take 3.5 years of Jesus' ministry, and then these end 3.5 years, how did you that's the, the number of
Of the tribulation.
which
What
is,
I'm,
which is kind of used,
Yeah.
right throughout the scripture.
and I want you to be careful, though, to understand what could have been.